Imagine standing in a dark room with a single flame in front of you. At first, all you see is a candle, but as your attention deepens, the flame begins to feel less like an object and more like a threshold. The room grows silent. The ordinary world starts to fade away. Then a strange question arises. Are you looking at the light, or is the light revealing something inside you? That question leads us to one of the most misunderstood ideas in the history of Western mysticism: Photagogia. The word comes from Greek and, depending on the context, can be translated as the bringing, leading, or manifestation of light. But this simple definition can be deceptive. Photagogia was not a single religion. It was not a universally standardized ritual, and it certainly was not an ancient version of modern manifestation culture. It belonged to a much broader world in which light could be physical, symbolic, intellectual, and divine, all at the same time. To understand Photagogia, we have to enter the spiritual imagination of late antiquity, a time when philosophers, priests, and ritual specialists did not always separate metaphysics from religious practice. For them, the universe was not made of dead matter moving through empty space. It was a living hierarchy of realities, descending from invisible principles into visible forms. The physical world was understood as the lowest expression of a much greater order. Within this worldview, light was not merely a poetic symbol of goodness. It was one of the most powerful images available for explaining how a higher reality could become present without becoming material. A lamp can illuminate an entire room without breaking itself into pieces. In the same way, the divine could be understood as present throughout the cosmos without being reduced to the cosmos itself. This is why the language of light became so important in Platonism, Hermeticism, the Chaldean Oracles, later Christian mysticism, and many esoteric traditions. Light suggested presence without physical contact, unity without division, and revelation without exhausting its source. Photagogia emerged from this world of ideas. It did not refer simply to seeing brightness. It referred to the possibility that light could serve as a mediator between different levels of reality. One of the most important figures for understanding this background is Iamblichus, the Neoplatonic philosopher and defender of Theurgy. In Book 2 of his work, commonly known as On the Mysteries, Iamblichus discusses divine manifestations and the ways in which different classes of spiritual beings were believed to appear. These appearances were often described through images of light, fire, radiance, clarity, and overwhelming luminosity. But there is a crucial distinction that must be understood. Theurgy was not supposed to involve a magician forcing a god to obey. In the view of Iamblichus, the gods could not be controlled by human words or gestures. Ritual worked because the cosmos already contained divine symbols, sacred correspondences, and hidden bonds of participation. The rite did not manufacture divinity. Instead, it prepared the human being to receive something that was already higher than the human being. This changes everything. When understood within this spiritual and philosophical atmosphere, Photagogia was less about producing a special effect and more about establishing the conditions in which a luminous manifestation could be perceived, interpreted, or ritually welcomed. The process often began with purification. That word can sound moralistic, but in this context, purification also meant removing noise. The practitioner attempted to reduce distraction, disorder, emotional turbulence, and the ordinary fragmentation of the mind. The body, the space, the timing, the spoken words, and the symbolic objects all became part of a carefully controlled environment. Then came a separation from ordinary reality. A ritual space was created, not because the divine was believed to exist only inside a temple, but because the human mind does not perceive every place in the same way. Boundaries change our attention. Silence changes our attention. Repetition changes our attention. Sacred images change our attention. At the center of this system were symbols that were sometimes described using Greek terms such as Synthemata. These were signs or tokens believed to participate in the realities they represented. To a modern observer, a sacred object may appear to be nothing more than a reminder. To a theurgist, however, the symbol could function as a genuine point of contact between the visible and invisible worlds. This is one of the most difficult ideas for modern people to understand. We usually think of a symbol as something invented by the human mind. Ancient ritual philosophy often treated certain symbols as discoveries rather than inventions. They were understood as patterns already woven into the structure of reality. When ritual words, gestures, images, incense, fire, and concentrated attention were brought together, light could become the language of manifestation. But what kind of light are we talking about? This is where Photagogia becomes more complex than most explanations are willing to admit. The light could be physical, such as a flame, a lamp, a reflective surface, or an illuminated ritual object. It could be visionary, appearing as a brightness perceived inwardly even when no external source was visible. It could be intellectual, taking the form of a sudden recognition in which a hidden pattern became clear. Or it could be interpreted as a sign of a spiritual presence. These possibilities were not always separated from one another. A physical flame could support a visionary state. A visionary image could produce intellectual insight. An intellectual insight could then be interpreted as contact with a divine intelligence. So when an ancient text speaks of light, we should not rush to assume that it refers only to photons, only to imagination, or only to God. The same language could operate across several levels at once. Imagine a person who has spent days preparing for a ceremony. They have fasted, prayed, memorized sacred words, and arranged every object with great care. At the decisive moment, they perceive a light they cannot explain. For that person, the question is not merely, did I hallucinate? The deeper question is, how much of what I experienced came from the ritual? How much came from expectation? And how much came from something I do not yet understand? Have you ever tried reading a book about esotericism, only to feel completely lost after just a few pages? This often happens because many of these authors use symbolic language, coded references, and complex concepts that can be extremely difficult to understand without specialized knowledge. That is exactly why I created the MAP method. It was designed to make these teachings clear, accessible, and understandable for everyone. The program includes 12 documentary-style videos that offer detailed explanations of 12 of the most important works in esotericism, along with practical guidance to help you apply their teachings to your own life. You will also receive illustrated study materials, as well as access to a specialized artificial intelligence assistant that can answer your questions within minutes. You can access the program through the link in the first pinned comment. Be sure to take advantage of our special launch offer, which is backed by a 7-day money-back guarantee. Now let us return to the topic of the video. That is not only an ancient question, it is one of the most human questions we can ask. If this distinction between ritual as control and ritual as participation has already changed the way you see ancient magic, take a moment to like the video. It helps serious esoteric material reach people who are searching for more than surface-level explanations. To go deeper, we have to understand the spiritual anatomy assumed by this worldview. The human being was not reduced to a body containing some vague idea of a soul. Neoplatonic thinkers described multiple levels of perception and consciousness. The senses receive impressions. The imagination organizes images. Reason compares and interprets. The intellect, or Nous, recognizes truths that are not merely sensory. This hierarchy matters because a luminous experience could pass through all of these levels. The eyes might see a flame. The imagination might form a symbolic image around it. Reason might connect that image to a philosophical doctrine. The intellect might recognize a meaning that feels immediate, unified, and beyond ordinary thought. Some Neoplatonic authors also spoke of an okema, a vehicle of the soul which later readers sometimes compare to the astral body. That comparison can be useful, but the terms are not identical. The vehicle of the soul belonged to a specific philosophical framework that explained how the soul mediates between intelligible and embodied existence. It should not be treated as a universal label for every later doctrine involving subtle bodies. Within this model, Photagogia becomes more than a ritual event. It becomes a drama of perception. The light may appear before the eyes, within the imagination, through the intellect, or across all three. This leads us to a difficult possibility. Perhaps the real mystery was never about whether the light existed outside or inside the person. Perhaps the division between inner and outer was itself being challenged. This does not mean that every vision is divine. It means that the categories we use may be too simple for the kinds of experiences being described. When you hear the word illumination, what do you imagine first? Do you imagine knowledge, a spiritual presence, or an actual light perceived in a vision? Write your answer in the comments, because that single difference changes the entire meaning of Photagogia. The idea also helps us understand why light appears in so many traditions without proving that all traditions teach the same thing. In Hermetic texts, light is often connected with mind, awakening, and the recognition of humanity's higher origin. In Kabbalistic thought, especially in later formulations, divine light becomes a language for emanation, concealment, reception, and the relationship between the infinite and the vessels that receive its influence. In Christian mystical theology, light can signify divine knowledge, sanctification, or participation in the presence of God. In Thelema and modern ceremonial magic, illumination can describe the reorganization of identity around a deeper spiritual will. These are meaningful parallels, but they are not interchangeable doctrines. The Kabbalistic idea of Or Ein Sof is not simply a Hebrew version of Greek Photagogia. The Christian doctrine of divine or uncreated light is not merely the Theurgy presented under different names. The Hermetic experience of mind is not automatically identical to a Neoplatonic ritual manifestation. Similar symbols can carry very different metaphysical meanings. This is one of the great disciplines of serious esoteric study. We must learn to recognize correspondence without erasing difference. The immature approach says, every tradition speaks of light, so they must all mean exactly the same thing. The more careful approach asks, why does light repeatedly become the chosen image for knowledge, divinity, presence, and transformation? And what does each individual tradition mean by it? Photagogia gives us a precise way to explore that question, because it stands at the boundary between symbol and event. Was the light only a metaphor? Sometimes it was not. Was it always a supernatural apparition? We cannot honestly say that either. A balanced interpretation has to consider at least three possibilities. The first possibility is spiritual. The practitioner encountered a real manifestation of a higher order of being. The second possibility is psychological. Focused attention, expectation, sensory conditions, repetition, exhaustion, fasting, and altered states produced a vivid, luminous experience. The third possibility is symbolic. Whatever its ultimate cause may have been, the experience reorganized the person's consciousness and became meaningful as part of an initiation. These explanations do not always cancel one another out. A mystical tradition may argue that the psyche is the instrument through which spiritual reality becomes perceptible. A psychologist may argue that the experience is generated within the mind. A philosopher may ask whether something existing inside the mind truly means that it is unreal. But the most important test comes after the light disappears. Did the experience make the person more lucid, or did it make them more grandiose? Did it make them more compassionate or more self-obsessed? Did it make them more capable of discernment or more dependent on signs? Did it produce an ethical transformation, or only the exciting belief that the person had been specially chosen? This is the hidden danger within every doctrine of illumination. Light can reveal, but the idea of light can also blind. A person may become so fascinated by visions that they stop questioning themselves. They may confuse intensity with truth, beauty with authority, or emotional power with spiritual authenticity. For this reason, mature traditions repeatedly emphasize preparation, discipline, humility, and discernment. The deepest lesson of Photagogia is not that every unusual light should be worshipped. It is that perception must be transformed before revelation can be trusted. This is why the final meaning of Photagogia is far greater than simply bringing light into a room. It is the attempt to make the invisible intelligible. It is the use of ritual, symbol, attention, and metaphysical knowledge to create a bridge between ordinary consciousness and a reality believed to exceed it. The light may be physical, visionary, intellectual, or spiritual, but in every case, it marks a threshold. At the beginning, we imagined a person standing before a single flame, wondering whether the light came from the world, from the mind, or from something beyond both. Now we can see that Photagogia does not give us an easy answer. Instead, it gives us a far more demanding question. What must awaken within the human being in order to recognize light? Perhaps that is why this idea has survived in so many different forms. It speaks to the suspicion that reality contains more than our ordinary habits allow us to perceive. It also suggests that the real work is not forcing the hidden world to appear, but becoming capable of meeting it without illusion. Which subject should we explore next? The vehicle of the soul, astral light, Theurgy, or the sacred Synthemata? Leave your choice in the comments. And if you believe these traditions deserve to be studied with depth, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who is also searching for what exists behind the symbols. A playlist will appear on the screen in just a moment. bringing together other concepts that complete this map. Choose the next video and continue the journey with us. What if you could explore 12 of the books that shaped Western esotericism through one clear and structured path? Esoteric Atlas. 12 Classics Decoded brings together foundational works by 6 major figures: Aleister Crowley, Helena Blavatsky, Eliphas Levi, Manly P., Paul Dion Fortune, and Israel Regardie. Instead of facing dense texts, unfamiliar terminology, and conflicting interpretations on your own, you will be guided through 12 documentary-style lessons, with each lesson lasting approximately 45 minutes. Every lesson follows the MAP method. First, you will map the author, the historical context, and the influence behind the book. Then you will analyze its key symbols, concepts, and teachings through clear and accessible language. Finally, you will put what you have learned into practice through guided reflection, journaling exercises, and study prompts. You will also build a permanent reference library featuring 12 illustrated ebooks, 12 mind maps, 12 specialized glossaries, and 12 guided journaling worksheets. That gives you 48 downloadable study resources, along with a custom AI study companion that can help you review important ideas, clarify unfamiliar terminology, and answer your questions. You will receive immediate lifetime access, and your purchase is protected by a 7-day money-back guarantee. The regular price is $99.99. But the first 100 students can join for only $49.99. 12 classics, 1 method, 1 clear map. Follow the link in the description and begin your studies with Esoteric Atlas. And do not leave just yet. I have put together an organized playlist so you can continue your journey right here on the channel. Click one of the playlists appearing on your screen right now, and I will see you in the next video.